And here's Elizabeth.
And here I am. Well, as I did with the previous one, let's double check that you're seeing my slides. Someone,
Yes.
Melissa, thank you, Melissa, for giving me the thumbs up. So I was asked, people have visited my garden before and, they noticed that I've put in a crevice garden today. So I'm going to kind of share about what I'm doing with my crevice garden. Here, hold on a minute. I just realized that I'm not sharing me. There, now you can see me, sorry. And so let's go ahead and get into this one. And so, when we hear about a crevice garden, really a crevice garden is a special form within a rock garden. I'm going to describe it that way, or a modified rock garden. And so what you're doing with a crevice garden is mimicking these gaps that occur naturally. And in nature, plants would establish between those gaps and the roots would grow down between, and the rocks would above ground would provide some protection from the wind and a little bit of warmth, from the sun during the day. And those crevices with the deep fill then would be the area where the roots could survive. And a lot of times these plants, the root system is a lot more developed than the plants that are showing above. So a lot of times when you're seeing rock garden plants or even desert plants, they usually are modified to survive extreme environments. So they're kind of a special plant form that goes along with this as well. And so the picture that I'm showing you here is if you go to Missouri Botanical, they have a Bavarian alpine garden there, and there's a couple of areas that have sections that are actually crevice gardens. So I'm showing you that section in the picture here. And so, and here's just a little bit, another angle of it. And so the middle picture is what it looks like in midsummer when the plants are still green. And then the picture that I've already shown you that is repeated here on the right is what it looks like just a few weeks ago when I took another picture of it so you can see what the plants look like dormant. And so, in a crevice garden, a lot of times the rocks, just like an alpine garden, are a major feature in the garden. It's not just the plants, but the rocks themselves are a major feature. And so I've seen, in my travels, rock gardens elsewhere, and I wanted to show you a picture of a more traditional rock garden. And so this is just a stunningly beautiful rock garden that I was at in a visit to Germany. And some of you might have been there too and seen this, but this is a more traditional where you see that rock garden plants are very low form, growing, and that there's lots of them. But again, that rock is just an outstanding feature in there. So if we go back to the topic, I'm going to say in crevice garden that often the plants have a tendency to be alpine types of plants or desert or miniature types of plants that follow xeric gardening or landscaping principles. And when we say xeric, we mean very dry soil environments. And so when we make our own rock garden, as opposed to just having natural environment for it, the soil is modified to really be designed to be sharply drained. I think that's probably one of the major considerations, is that you have to have absolute sharp drainage. And so the soil is modified, as I said here, to include a mix of topsoil, grit. I actually use gravel myself, compost, and sand to promote water retention when water is limited, and drainage when water is plentiful. So we put both components in there. If we just had straight sand culture, there would be no water holding capacity, and there's possibility that plants wouldn't survive. So there's a little bit added to it to help with some of the water holding capacity. I'm going to say for the most part, these are full sun plants. Now I will say that there are occasions where you're going to see a plant that says it's amenable for a rock garden or a crevice garden, for afternoon shade as well. And so sometimes there's an option for those plants too. And maybe you want to have a tree or something that provides a little bit of shade for those plants that need it. And so I just want to show you in traditional rock gardens, they are again very low growing. And as you see in the picture to the right, a lot of times there are more porous stones, like tufa stone, that occurs in a lot of mountain areas where streams have terminated. And so they formed a long time ago. And it's a very porous stone that holds some moisture as well. And so a lot of times you'll see plants and lichens and sedums and things actually growing on the stones themselves. And it takes quite a bit of time to get this particular look. So I'm gonna say, if you guys go into rock gardening, whether you're using our native sand prairie plants or whether you're using alpine plants, in general, it's going to take a while to get this established. They're just usually slow growing, so have that expectation. I also wanted to show you some rock gardens that are a bit more fanciful. This is for any of you that have gone up to Wisconsin to the flower factory. Unfortunately, last year was their last year in business. They decided to retire after 37 years, but they were specialists in alpine plants, and they had some pretty fantastic rock gardens. And I'm showing you a couple of different views of one that they had, and this was their little rail yard that they built with alpine plants. And there's quite a bit of tufa and other limestone type of materials for this rock garden. So I'm setting myself up here to not look really good because I'm going to warn you right now, my crevice garden looks absolutely nothing like these fantastical, really skilled people. My rock garden is very, very small. And it really came about because I wanted to grow Daphne. And Daphne is a plant that requires absolutely sharp drainage. I mean, it doesn't like wet feet at all. Daphnes are not native to here. And so these are definitely alpine plants. But I wanted to try and grow them. Well, I had to come up with something, so that I just didn't outright kill my investment. And I kind of like the look of a crevice garden. So I decided to make this small little, crevice garden just to be able to put my Daphne plant in it. And so naturally, it grew from there. I mean, anytime that you have an area where you have one plant, you start seeing other plants that you want to add to it all over the place. And so I guess what I'm leading up to is, you don't actually have to have a crevice garden. It might be more that you want to grow plants that require this sharp drainage. And we have a number of native plants or ones that are from the sand prairie area that require this type of sharp, dry type of growing environment. So I kind of want to talk you through what I did. I kind of had a situation where I had a driveway that I don't use that, has a history of having stone put on it for well over 100 years. So I had an edge of a driveway that I actually use. So those of you who don't want to put a rock garden in their driveway, you might actually need to dig down and fill with a base of gravel or something to keep your drainage up, and then build the rock garden or crevice garden on top of it. So I've got here, normally you dig down to create that space for, a drainage base like gravel. In my case, I just started building right on the driveway, and it is working very well for me. You will also know that in some of the pictures that I showed you, that a lot of people have elaborate stonework done for their garden. And so if you go to Missouri Botanical Garden, you'll see that. Anybody that's really into alpine plants usually has elaborate stonework that has borders. Mine does not. Mine is freeform. The only rule that I stuck to is that I have the stones that are limestone that were cut to lay vertically to create those spaces. And so what I've started right here is that I started out building, let me go back. I started out with these stones and I decided I didn't quite have enough. You know, I wanted to have more stones. And so I went to just a stone lot and started looking for pieces. And so I already had, you know, kind of a quartz flagstone. So I was looking for more. One of the things that I've noticed in all my reading is they say, you know, kind of stick with the same stone throughout, or it starts looking disorganized and not natural. Let's put it that way, not natural. And so I tried to stay with the same family of stones throughout so that it had a more uniform look. So as I said, I repurposed a lot of stone that I already had, but I went and I got some more. And as I was, you know, building this, I started looking around at a lot of other gardens to try and get ideas for placement, what I liked, what I didn't like. I read a lot of books on, you know, what the soil itself should be. And I will tell you that for every alpine garden book or rock garden book that you read, you will find a different recipe for what that should be. And so I'm just showing you here on what I went through. And I decided to go with, you know, one of the trial garden recipes. And a lot of times, even if you go to some place like Missouri Botanical, you'll see that they have a lot of these trough gardens. And this is the recipe that I use for my trough gardens. And so I used it for my crevice garden as well. And so here's the recipe. It's 9 parts coarse sand. So when you're looking at these recipes, whatever your measurement is, just use 9 parts coarse sand. So if you're using a 1-gallon bucket, think of it as being 9 gallons. If you're using a 1-cup measuring cup, then it's 1 cup of, or 9 cups of coarse sand. That's pretty much how this works, is whatever your measurement is, you can scale it up or down. 5 parts of compost, and that's the part that gives you the water holding capacity. 4 parts, and I use pea gravel. This again is to help with drainage on this, to really give you that sharp drainage. And I also use 1 part of turfus. Now this isn't a required ingredient, but turfus is, if you've ever worked with it, it's a manufactured soil conditioner that resists compaction, and it's used regularly in sporting fields, and it's sold in 50-pound bags. And it kind of looks like cat litter to me, is how I would describe it. I usually buy mine, just to give you one source when you're looking around. I buy mine at Site One Landscape Supply, and they're here in Collinsville. But I have seen it in a number of garden centers that, you know, cater to bigger arenas. So if you go over, I don't know that I've seen it on this side of the river at the garden centers, but I don't want to exclude anybody, but I've definitely bought it on some of the larger garden centers on the other side in St. Louis. So if you want to add that, you can. Again, the whole goal is to really keep the mix light and well drained throughout. So I will say that this is probably one of the hardest mixes I've ever had to make, and I say that from a physical standpoint. This is an incredibly heavy mix, very difficult to work with. So if you don't have something like a cement mixer, one of those small ones, I really recommend that you make it in small batches at a time. This is just incredibly heavy. The first time that I made it in way too big of a batch, and it just was physically exhausting to get it mixed up. So keep that in mind if you're gonna, you know, start building, you know, just a regular sand bed, or whether you're gonna add crevice to it. This has been a very good mix for me, and the plants have performed well in it. So here is the initial layout. So ignore those red steel rings. Those are just placeholders for larger plants that I had intended, one of them being my Daphne. Again, it was just so that I didn't get the stones where I, you know, too close to where I wanted to plant some plants on there. So I started out by spreading a 6-inch base of my prepared soil. And it's amazing how quickly you use up that mix. I don't know how many times I've mixed it up or had to make more batches. It seems like the soil is probably the biggest thing that you're going to constantly be making. And I did this over a couple of days where I just kind of looked at it from every angle, from the garden. This is something that my mom can look at out of her bedroom. And so I was, looking out her bedroom window so that I could have a good view, of the garden so that it looked nice over that. And so once I thought that I had the stones kind of embedded in that 6-inch base, I started topping it up then with the next level of base. And so this, you're going to use a lot of this mix to make a crevice garden. And so I'm going to say that I easily added 6 to 8 inches, and I have added to it since as well. And so not only to provide depth for the roots, but also to hold these stones in place. One of the things that I learned that I really didn't think about is, for some reason, deer are really attracted to this garden. And so they walk through it, they bang into these stones. They've actually moved some of the stones. And so I've had to reset just because of deer being in there and checking stuff out. And so once you have the base sand or mix put in there, I started kind of artistically adding deeper areas instead of it all being one level. Unlike a traditional, garden, usually the soil and rocks are at different levels. I was kind of on a flat plane. And so I kind of had some contour with the soil mix itself and kind of making sand dunes, whatever you want to call them, up against some of the stones. And so it had a little bit of an artistic flair. One thing that I have not done yet that I intend to do, but I really kind of want to be in this phase where it's a little easier to add plants, is I'm probably going to top this with a larger size gravel when it's finished, just for a finished look and make it look more a part of the landscape, because it is in the driveway. Most rock gardens or crevice gardens do have a finished layer on it. Mine does not as of yet. Mine is fairly recently established. I established it just a few years ago. So in 2019 was the year that I started establishing it. So some of the things that I've learned is that deer are a problem. And with the amount of moisture and freeze thaw, that stones actually do move around. And after the first year, I had to reset a number of the stones. And even though this mix is, heavy gravel and sand, you wouldn't really think it would settle that much, but it actually did settle a lot. And so I had some of the plants that actually had frost heaved out of it and had to come in and add another layer of sand to this particular garden. So those are just some of the, beginner, this is what I learned type of situation on this gravel garden. So I'm just now moving into year 3 there. So I regularly visit the Missouri Botanical Garden because they have an alpine garden, and they're actually working on their kind of a, for lack of a better word, sand prairie garden that's in their more natural area. But some of the things that when you're purchasing plants, one of the things that you have to really pay attention to that maybe you don't pay attention to with a lot of our other plants is that some of these plants don't appreciate winter wet. And so if you go to Missouri Botanical Garden, you'll see that they're actually trialing different methods on how to prevent rainfall from, entering the soil around certain plants. And you can see that they've got plexiglass around there. So that's something that I see quite regularly when I'm, shopping for plants or reading about plants. Is that is a key feature they will mention, is whether they do or don't appreciate winter wet. And a lot of them don't appreciate winter wet, which is a problem for us because we've got a lot of winter wet. So some of these plants you might have to figure out how to prevent from picking up. So some of the other things that I will tell you that I have learned, not only through reading, but talking to other people, and just learned, unfortunately, the hard way with the plant, is you always want to learn as much about the plant's natural environment. Just like the previous talk I did with native plants, this is even more so because you have to understand what their conditions are used to and try to mimic that in your particular crevice garden. And I'm going to say that St. Louis presents some really challenging issues for particularly alpine plants. Maybe not so much of us, our native plants that, you know, are from the sand prairie, or but the ones that are alpine, if you're bringing those in. So we have roller coaster winter temperatures, and most alpine plants do not encounter that, so they're not adapted to it. We have the very high rainfall that I already mentioned, and so some of these plants need to be protected from winter wet. And we also have scorching, long-lasting summer heat. And a lot of the alpine plants, though they might experience some heat, it's usually not to the level we have or the humidity. And so some of these plants just outright won't work here. That's the best way that I can describe it. So I always tell people, you know, one of the best things when you're going into these special environments like that is to try and visit other gardens or the botanical garden and look what plants are surviving there. If they're surviving there, you have a better chance of it working. You have to question, well, hey, Missouri Botanical Garden has every plant under the sun, but they don't have this one. There's probably a reason why. And it might be that it's just not suitable for our particular climate. So another, you know, I kind of wanted to give you an example of one that is rather challenging. You know, probably one of the most famous alpine plants is Edelweiss. And it just absolutely melts here. It just does not do well in most alpine gardens or crevice gardens in the St. Louis area. But, you know, something like speedwell, there are a number of species that do well in the St. Louis area. So you're going to really want to do a little more extra work before you purchase a plant and kill it. I will say that aside from the Daphne that I knew I wanted to try, I really did try to start out easy with plants that I knew, you know, already knew as garden plants that appreciated, you know, sharp drainage and on the dry side. And so two of them that are real easy and lots of options, you know, are dianthus and the creeping type, I will say, and thyme. Both of those are very adapted, you know, to sharp drainage and have done very well in my crevice garden. Other plants that I've noticed that do very well, yay for me, anybody that knows me knows that I love irises. A lot of the species iris do very well in a rock garden setting. You know, and it kind of becomes a challenge of, do you stick with all small little plants or do you get some big plants? And I liken it to, you know, wearing a tennis shoes with a prom dress. Maybe some would view that those don't look well together. And probably purist of an alpine garden or a crevice garden would say, Elizabeth, that roof iris just does not look like a traditional crevice garden plant. And I don't disagree with that, but I will say that, you know, if there's a plant that you really like, a crevice garden for sharp drainage, there are some plants that you can just put in there and maybe it doesn't look like a traditional garden. So I will tell you that there are plants that do well in this that aren't normally considered crevice garden plants. Now, I mentioned a couple of times natives. There are a few natives that are working very well that I'm showing you here, and they have that nice small rock garden, look to them. And so prairie pussy toes, and prairie pussy toes is one of those plants that can just like take off and cover the world. But surprisingly, it's behaving itself rather well in this rock garden, crevice garden setting. And desert biscuit root, I could never grow that before. None of my growing conditions are suitable for that, but it is doing very well in this crevice garden setting. So I'm still kind of, as I said, I started building the garden in 2019 and started adding plants little by little. I'm still kind of at the stage where I'm limiting the tricky ones, or the ones that have a high risk of failure. I do have this Echium false liatris that I tried, and I'm happy to report that it is clearly going to come up again this year. So I kind of consider Echiums to be a little bit tricky one, but I'm excited that this one is doing well in the rock garden. So my advice to those of you, don't go out and buy every cool looking plant you find. Just kind of build up a little at a time. Take the time to see what's working in other people's rock gardens before you add to your own. So some of the things that I'm considering that probably will be easy, like, my thyme and also my dianthus, is moss phlox, which a lot of us have, and heronsbill, which looks kind of like a geranium. I'm going to introduce a couple of those once I find a few plants to introduce. So again, little by little, I'm going to fill this in, but I'm not going to get too crazy. So just showing you some pictures of how we're progressing. So I did some original planting in May of 2019, and I'm going to say that I probably killed half of those plants, or they did not survive my choices of where I put them. And so you can kind of see that reflected in the May 2020. The second year I kind of reevaluated, well, that didn't work. Let's not go out of our way to get more of that. And so I'm really looking at what is being successful in this crevice garden. This is what it looks like right now. I took the picture in 2020. And I want to point out that the plant in the upper left hand that I have a little comment box, that is the whole reason for me wanting to have this crevice garden. And at the very least, that plant is still living and blooming quite beautifully last year. And so I expect it to do well this year as well. All that blank spot to the left is a new addition that hasn't been planted yet. So that's the area that I'm going to allow a few new plants. It's one of the bad things about building something like this, is that you have a tendency to continue to add to it. So I wanted to point out, how do you know which plants are what? So if you're interested in native plants, Illinois Wildflower has this really useful page that if you go to their website that I have pointed here, and then you click on select prairie wildflowers, you'll notice that he has several lists of plants based on their environment. And one of those choices is sand prairie flora. And so, and he denotes which ones are dry sand prairie and which ones are moist sand prairie. And so if you're very interested in native plants and want to build, a sand crevice bed, that's a good source for which native plants. Now, if you're interested in alpine plants, the ones that, you know, are above the tree line, where trees don't grow because the environments are too harsh, but the small little traditional alpine plants, two nurseries that specialize in alpines are Arrowhead Alpines and Reitman Alpine Nurseries. One of the things I like about Reitman Alpine Nurseries is that he has a plant search feature, and you can actually say, I only want to look at plants that go in a rock garden, you know, like sand culture or something like that, because there are a lot of alpine plants that actually grow in, you know, regular soil, organic soil. And so I think Reitman's has a nice little feature if you're interested in alpine plants to get started. So that was my little introduction to me trying to create a micro environment for plants that I couldn't otherwise grow. And at this point, I'm going to answer any questions that someone might have. And I think, Melissa, I'm going to pass it back to you at this point. Let me stop the share.
It's Denise, but I'm sure she's on here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, Denise, sorry, Melissa. I better get straight home too.
I can help too, either way, but Denise has got it. So
Yeah.
Go for it, Denise. Did anyone have any questions?
Yes, there were a couple. There, very early on, they asked about the proportions of topsoil, gravel, and sand.
Yes.
And then, but you had a slide on that, I believe.
Right. So I guess I'll go back to, did I sufficiently answer your question for who put that in there? If not, just put something else in and we'll go back to it.
Okay. And then Marilyn asked, how far do you dig down?
Well, in my particular garden, I did not. So I'm going to give you two different answers. So if you don't have a setting like I do, where I was sitting on an old driveway and you actually have to dig down, they'll usually say 12 to 18 inches for, you know, having a nice base underneath to have really good drainage. And I already had that, you know, with my driveway, so I didn't have to. So I'm going to say that you probably want to have at least 12-inch, you know, base underneath if you don't have it. If you're just putting it right on top of like regular soil.
Okay. And then Christine asks, are there any herbs that you recommend in a crevice garden?
You know, I'm going to say any of them that are more on the dry side. I've had, oh, my brain, I'm just drawing a blank here. I've had germander in mine, and it has done well. And I already mentioned all of the times work fairly well. If you put any onions in, those work fairly well. So I'm gonna be wishy-washy in my answer and say that anything that is tolerant, you know, of the dry side, that doesn't appreciate having wet feet will do well in this. And my mind is sitting here thinking that, you know, there are some herbs that are more rock garden-y looking than others. And so that's where thyme looks kind of rock gardening.
Okay. And then Jonathan has asked, since lavender likes dry, would it work in a crevice garden? I
absolutely have lavender in mine, because Jonathan, I was of the same thought you were, and I thought, I'm going to try this. The particular cultivar I have is phenomenal. It is doing very well. It has a different look to it than the plant structure that I have in regular soil. I'm going to say that it is smaller and more compact. And you know, you see that quite a bit with plants that are listed as being dry to average. They have a tendency to be a little more leggy when they have more water and more compact when they're dry. And I'm kind of seeing that in just this short little evaluation I've had. I'm kind of seeing that with lavender, but it is doing well. I checked it. It's this is going into year 2 for it. So it's been in the ground for 2 years. So it's year 3, the 3rd growing season, and it's doing well. I don't know how some of the more less winter hardy varieties would do. I like, Marilyn, your comment. It'd be good to look at plants along the bluffs to see what natives like rock. And I will make a comment before Denise gives me my next question, if there is one. At that Illinois wildflower list, it actually has a list of plants that do well, not only in sand prairie, but also gravel prairie and dolomite prairie. And so there's some nice lists there too. So if you have some really rocky ground, like the, you know, bedrock is right close to the surface, that would be more like dolomite prairie. Those are usually more in the northern part of the state, but you know, her comment is good on that. Denise, is there anything else?
There's one more. Someone was asking if flame flower would work in that type of garden.
Oh man, I wished it did for me, because that is just stunningly beautiful. That was, you know, the picture that I showed you just after planting had a flame flower in it. It did not make it through the first winter. And so I'm going to just say that was my first strike. Many of you know me that I have a 3 strikes you're out rule. That is a really beautiful plant, and I'm still debating on whether I want to risk killing another one for this now that I, you know, have the rock garden, the crevice garden a little more established. But it didn't make it. That was one that did not make it. Dang it.
Okay, and we're back to Marilyn. She says, hold it, there it is. Base, gravel, and then add the mix you recommend? Question.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, there needs to be some place for the water to go. And so, you know, if you don't have good drainage underneath, that's what the gravel's for. And so, yes, if you're going to dig down and put a gravel base, then you would build the crevice garden on top of it. And that's just to ensure that the water is going down and not being held up in the sand area. It needs to have some place to go. Is where, and I saw a comment, Denise, I'm going to jump ahead. Would you try Edelweiss again? I think I'm at my 3 strikes you're out on it. I just have not been successful with it. So I'm going to say no. I'm just going to enjoy the pictures I've taken of it where I have seen it successfully growing and live with it. It's just not one that I've had good luck with.
And then Marilyn asked base of 12 inches of gravel.
Well, again, it goes back to, you know, I'm going to say that that's the general recommendation in the books that I've seen. I didn't do it at all. So I'm just basing what I've read in other garden books. Marilyn, I would recommend that you do a little bit of, you know, research on establishing alpine gardens, but I'm going to say most are going to say, you know, something like a 12-inch, you know, base, just to ensure that you have sharp drainage. And that's really what it is ensuring you have sharp drainage. One of the things that I don't know if I emphasized it enough, you know, a lot of these plants have really large root systems in comparison to their top growth. Kind of surprising, actually, how much root mass they have. And it makes sense in nature. I mean, they're surviving difficult conditions. And so even the top, remember I told you I started with a 6-inch base and I added another I'm at least 6 inches. I'm guessing closer to 8. I came back in and I have probably added another 4 inches on top of that, you know, just to account for settling of that mix. And we, you know, plants were almost looked like they were being, you know, pulled out of the ground, but it was because the mix had settled. And so I've, you know, this year it doesn't look like I'm going to have to do that. But that first year, first and second year, I went through a lot of mix. And you think about people that, you know, make a traditional rock garden, they're building structures and backfilling with, you know, whatever mix they chose for. If you go to Missouri Botanical, you know, that is just a super impressive installation that I could never afford, you know, something like that. So I just have to go there and appreciate it. But still, the amount of mix that you have to make can sometimes become quite costly when you think of how many bags, you know, you have to buy of that.
Okay, that was all the questions, and they've thanked you for your presentation.
Yeah. I see Anne has asked a question about what is sharp drainage. So sharp drainage means, so if I have, you know, a cylinder of regular garden soil and I have a cylinder of sand and I pour water on top, with regular garden, you know, or average drainage, you might have a couple of drips come through, but that soil can actually hold on to a lot more water than compared to a mix that has like gravel and sand. So if you pour the water on top of that, it just doesn't have the water holding capacity. It just pours through and you'll have a lot more. So sharp drainage means that it wants it to hold just enough moisture for the plant to survive, but it doesn't want to sit in water. And so sharp drainage means that most of the water gravitationally flows away from it. And so, you know, I mentioned in my previous talk, one of the verbenas requires sharp drainage. It doesn't like wet feet. And so anytime you're thinking about, you know, some of our even garden soil plants, they have sharp drainage issues. Lavender is another plant that requires sharp drainage. So now if you're looking at, you know, any catalog, it doesn't necessarily need to be for rock gardens. If it says needs sharp drainage, that means that it absolutely does not, it cannot tolerate wet feet. It does not mean desert conditions. It just means that when it rains or you irrigate, the water moves out of the root zone, you know, mostly, and provides a minimal amount of water.